Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you probably already know that I was a private school leader for 33 years. And for 21 years, I was head of school at a pre-K through 12th grade school. And for 12 years, I was a middle school division head. And I think back on some of my favorite things about my job as a private school leader. And some of the things that immediately come to mind, Spirit Days were always my favorite, and just seeing all the kids get dressed up and me getting dressed up also. And home basketball games on a Friday night when the gym was packed and you've got your fries and your hot dogs at the concession stand, and there's just a really cool vibe in the school, in the gym. And graduation day, when you're sitting there, and especially when you're watching a kid walk across the stage that has come a really long way. So those are some of the favorite things that immediately come back to me. But when I think about the least favorite things of my job, the first thing that I think about is suspending and expelling students. And the stress of the thing that the kid did, the initial stress of finding out, and then the dread that I felt holding that phone in my hand, getting ready to dial the parent and call them and tell them what happened, and to ask them to come in to meet. Thinking about that meeting with the parents and at least one of them crying and sometimes pleading, and hearing them say that I just ruined their kid's life. And, over the years, I had to expel a board member's kid and the child of a teacher, the child of a big donor, and it was awful every single time. But it's part of the job and it's necessary, but it was also emotional and difficult and awful. And so as private school leaders, this is a very, very difficult part of our job. And so on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, I'm going to teach you how to navigate the emotional price tag of suspending or expelling a student. But before we get into that, I want to ask you a question. Do you want to have a better working relationship with your board? Do you want to learn how to be better prepared and less stressed for board meetings? Well, I've created a free resource for you, and it's called the 6 Keys to Improving Your Relationship with Your Board. And we know that the most important relationship in our private schools is the one between the board and the head of school. And I think there's always room for improvement in that relationship. And this is a free guide. It's a 7-page PDF where I give you specific strategies to strengthen your relationships with your board members. So you can go to theprivateschoolleader.com/board to grab your guide, the 6 Keys to Improving Your Relationship with Your Board. Again, that's theprivateschoolleader.com/board for your free guide, and I hope it helps. And then one last thing, I just know that this time of year you're super busy. There's all kinds of events and activities and sports and things going on. And I know that during my career this time of year, it just really seemed like that fall teacher PD day really snuck up on me. And I'm also trying to get everything done, but I really wanted to have meaningful PD for all of my teachers. And sometimes you have to have it when they're all in the room at the same time. And you have people who teach 3-year-olds all the way up to people who are teaching 18-year-olds. And it's tough to find meaningful PD, especially in our private schools, with that wide range in one room at one time. But I've got you covered. The plug-and-play PDs from Parent Academy are 2 45-minute webinars. Your teachers have a printable workbook with guided notes and discussion questions. And the first 4 modules of Parent Academy are just for you to help you learn how to be less stressed and less anxious and more calm and more confident when you work with the parents at your school. And so we can check 2 big boxes here. Improve your ability to deal with parents without internalizing the emotion of it, and equip your teachers. And let's check a 3rd box while we're at it. Have it be part of your fall teacher PD day. So if that sounds interesting to you, go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parentacademy to learn more. All that information is there for you. So I'm going to break this into 4 parts as we talk about suspending and expelling students and how that impacts us. And so first, we're going to talk about the emotional price tag, then how the emotional price tag can change the way you lead, and that isn't great, okay? Then we're going to talk about how to get it right when it comes to suspensions or expulsions. And then finally, I'm going to give you 6 strategies to lower the emotional price tag when you have to suspend or expel a student. So first is the emotional price tag. And I came up with 5 things that I think are the most prominent things that I certainly experienced. And I just want to touch on each of them because, you know, I never really talked about emotions and never really, you know, just you put your head down as a private school leader and you kind of don't have time for feelings and you just have to keep going and keep going. And I found that was something that accelerated my path to burnout and to ulcers and to other problems. And so I don't want you to go there. You know, that's kind of the point of the podcast. And so I want to just take a quick look at the price tag and then help you with all of that. So number 1 on my list here is guilt. So when we have to suspend a student, and especially when we have to expel a student, sometimes we feel guilty and we're asking ourselves, did I do enough? Did I fail this student? Did we as a school fail this kid and this family? Should I have intervened sooner? Should I have reached out sooner? You know, did I do enough? Was there another way? And, you know, should I have brought the parents in sooner to talk to them about how serious it was? And, you know, that's true sometimes when it comes to things that are chronic behaviors that escalate, but also sometimes the behavior just kind of comes out of the blue. But I don't know about you, but I've certainly experienced this. And I just want to pause for a second because I know that we have 2 different kinds of people in our audience today. We have a lot of private school leaders who have had the unfortunate experience of suspending or expelling a student or both. And then we have some of you that are listening that have not done that yet. And so this podcast episode is for both of you, because just because you haven't experienced that yet, I want to build you up and give you strategies and help you be more resilient and more proactive so that you can manage these emotions and, quite frankly, maybe even prevent some of these emotions. So I just wanted to give you that quick sidebar that this episode is for everybody. So the first thing that I mentioned was guilt, and then number 2 is grief. And maybe we don't think about that, but we're not just removing a student from our school community, but like we're closing the book on this kid and sometimes on the family because, you know, sometimes they pull their other kids out. And so I think that we grieve what could have been. You know, have you ever had a relationship or, you know, you applied for a job and you got all excited about it and then it didn't happen and then you just have this really weird feeling? Well, you're grieving what could have been. And so, you know, we lost the opportunity to have that student experience the full experience of our school, go all the way through to graduation and to turn it around. And, you know, some of these kids are the ones who were really working hard and were really trying, and we see some progress and they keep messing up and et cetera, and then they do the thing, or they do the thing too many times and it leads to that suspension or that expulsion. And one of the emotions that I think that we experience is grief. And then number 3 on the list is fear. This was certainly true for me. I worry about how the parents are going to react. I said before about just having that phone in my hand and I'm picking up the phone to call the parent. I mean, I'm like shaking in my boots. Okay. Maybe it's worry about backlash from the board or from how the school's going to be portrayed as so unfair and unfeeling and uncaring, in the family, in the parents' Facebook group. Or maybe it's from the faculty. And then I sometimes would catastrophize about things like, well, what if the 3 local news stations are here tomorrow morning because of the thing that happened? And this would especially be true as far as me catastrophizing if it was something that was a post that was out there on social media that could be widely shared. And then sometimes I would catastrophize, maybe the kid was bullying someone, or he hurt someone physically, or she hurt someone physically, and that's why that child was expelled or suspended. Well, then I'm thinking about lawsuits. And so, and then it's like, on top of that, with the fear, some of you have had this happen where within an hour after the end of the parent meeting, the parent is emailing or phoning the board chair or a board member. And then you're like, okay, great. They're going over my head. Is this going to stick? Is the board going to have my back? And so there's a lot of fear attached to this decision. And then number 4 on the list of the emotional price tag is compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue. We're servant leaders and we care deeply and we are high in emotional intelligence and we have big hearts and we care a lot, but caring costs energy. And when we discipline a student, especially one that we've invested a lot in, then it drains our empathy. It drains our reserves on compassion. And so there can be a fatigue factor there, and that doesn't feel great. And then finally, number 5, the emotion we feel is isolation. And this was also a big one for me, because as private school leaders, especially if you're a head of school, we make decisions in private that have public consequences. And then we announce the decision, but we can't really get into it and talk about what actually happened. And not only is that true with personnel issues, but sometimes, often, it's true with student issues as well, especially ones that involve a student leaving the school. And so, you can't vent publicly. You carry that decision kind of quietly and kind of alone. And I just found that isolation really took a toll on my mental health. And so that's another factor in all of this. So that's kind of what I'm thinking and what I'm describing when I'm talking about the emotional price tag. But now I want to shine a light on how this emotional price tag can actually change your leadership, because it certainly changed mine. So here's what I'm getting at. So let's say I suspended a kid and then or I expelled a kid and I went through all of those emotions, and now it's the next school year. And I've got a kid that's misbehaving, a kid that's doing this and that, a kid that's hanging his or her toes over the line of, being suspended or expelled. And now what am I doing? I'm thinking back to last year and all those emotions that I went through, and I don't want to do that again. So actually doing it the next time, those emotions from the past can change the way that you lead. So let me tell you what I mean. Number 1, avoiding difficult conversations. So now I'm delaying calling parents, and I'm delaying or avoiding holding students accountable, and I'm just kind of talking myself into, well, let's give it more time. Maybe this problem will get better. And sometimes it does, but that's rare. And so what I found was I lost credibility with my teachers, and then sometimes it would end up being that I had to make the difficult decision anyways, but I was avoiding those emotions by kicking the can down the road and avoiding difficult conversations. And then the second thing that it does as far as impacting the way that we lead, sometimes for you, this was true for me, is that I was inconsistent with the handbook. Well, what happens if the handbook says one thing, but your heart says another? Let me say that again. What happens if the handbook says one thing, but your heart says another? You love this kid. You don't want this kid to be suspended. You don't want this kid to be expelled. So then what do? I'll tell you what I did. Sometimes I made exceptions. And when I made exceptions, when we make exceptions to the rule, when we don't follow the handbook, we're not doing that with wisdom and discernment. We're doing that out of emotion. And then we're unintentionally undermining the trust in the system. We're undermining our teachers. We're creating confusion among staff and parents. And what about the parents of the kid over there who last year got suspended and now this kid did something similar and there's not a suspension, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just thinking back, and it happens. And why was I inconsistent with the handbook? Why was I avoiding difficult conversations? Because I'm trying to avoid the emotions that I know are going to go with doing the thing that needs to be done. And the third way that this emotional price tag impacted my leadership in real time was that sometimes I would overcompensate with grace or second chances or third chances or ninth chances. So we know that we have to have grace in our schools, okay? These are kids. They make mistakes, so on and so forth. But I found this quote when I was preparing for this episode, and I want to hit you with this. Grace without accountability isn't grace, it's avoidance. And I'll read that again. Grace without accountability isn't grace, it's avoidance. And that's certainly what it was for me. And sometimes we convince ourselves that we're being merciful or that we're showing grace, when really what I was doing was I was just protecting myself from discomfort, from the pain, from the emotional price tag of suspending someone or kicking someone out of the school or picking up that phone to tell the parent that that's what needed to happen. And I think you know where I'm going with this. Like, this isn't the way that we're supposed to lead, but we're human beings, and sometimes this is the way that we do lead. And then the fourth thing and the fourth way that it impacts our leadership is emotional burnout. Because each unresolved situation, so let's say that we are avoiding the pain, and so we avoid difficult conversations, and we're inconsistent with the handbook, and we overcompensate with grace and give them their fourth and fifth chance, then those unresolved situations stack on top of the last one and the last one. Our credibility with our teachers go down. It impacts morale. And now all of a sudden we're carrying around 10 times the emotional weight because we never did the thing that we needed to do, and it's worse and it's worse and it's worse. And I've found for me that if my emotional weight becomes too much, that I just start leading out of a place of fear and not from a place of conviction or ethics or integrity or the handbook. And that's a bad place to be. And some of you that are listening, maybe many of you that are listening, you've been there. So one of the ways that I want to help you to not go there is to tell you 4 things about when you suspend or expel a kid, how to get it right. Okay, so this section is called How to Get It Right. So we've all either done this and then thought back on how we did it, or you haven't done it yet and you're thinking ahead, or maybe avoiding thinking ahead about it. But I think that there's no right way or wrong way to suspend a kid, or to know when to suspend a kid, when to expel a student. But I do think that these 4 things are pretty applicable across all of our schools. And so I hope you lean in and you kind of listen to this. So number 1, how to get it right. Be sure that you're sure. Be sure that you're sure. Thoroughly investigate. Here's the thing. For me, the higher the stakes of the consequence, the higher my standard was for being sure that the thing actually happened. And the most sure that I could be when I would make this decision was I had a teacher that saw it. So adult observation. It was on video. It was a screenshot. It was a thing that got flagged in the filter system, and it had a timestamp, and the IP showed that it was that kid's computer. So those are in the category of most sure. Well, in the category of less sure would be he said, she said, or a rumor, or me getting pressured from a teacher that I think kind of doesn't like this kid anyways. And have you heard, like, everyone's talking about it, or pressure from parents. And listen, I'm not saying tune out the teachers or tune out the parents and don't take that call when they say, hey, this kid's being mean to my kid or putting hands on my kid. Like, we've got to investigate everything. But my point is this. Be sure that you're sure. The stakes are high with a suspension or especially with an expulsion. And I just think that the higher the stakes of the consequence, the higher the standard for being sure has to be. Okay. Number 2 on how to get it right is focus on two sides of the coin. So I had a big problem with this early in my career with suspending and expelling students, and I would internalize all of this emotional pain, and it would impact me negatively and keep me from doing what I needed to do the next time. But what I started to do at some point in my career was to view every kid in my school like a coin, okay? And that coin, that two-sided coin, on one side is the word privilege and on one side is the word responsibility. And if that student, let's say it's a 7th grade boy, okay, if he fulfills his responsibility of being a good citizen, doing what he's supposed to do in the school, then he gets to keep the privilege of attending the school. But if he can't fulfill that responsibility, then he loses the privilege of attending the school. Sometimes he might lose it for a few days and be suspended, or depending on the nature of what he did, maybe he is expelled. Okay? And so what I found is that it would help me do the thing that needed to be done, to do the right thing, when I would focus on the two-sided coin of privilege and responsibility. And it wasn't that I was doing this to the kid, but that the child was demonstrating either I can fulfill the responsibility of being part of this school community or I can't. And in life, okay, you have a driver's license. And if you live near a road where the speed limit is 25 and you drive 70, you're going to get a ticket. And then you're going to get another ticket if you do it again 2 weeks later. And if you do it again 2 weeks after that, you're probably going to get your license suspended. And then when you get your license back and you speed 70 miles an hour in the 25 mile per hour zone, you're going to lose your license. Maybe you're even going to go to jail. So if you can fulfill your responsibility of being a safe driver, you get to keep the privilege of having a driver's license. But if you can't fulfill your responsibilities, you lose the privilege. I found that framework to be super helpful when it came to suspensions and expulsions. Okay, so let's focus on number 3 then. And I was talking about what we're focusing on. Number 3 is focus on the behavior, not the child. And I know that's easy to say and hard to do, but like, what does the handbook say? Okay, what does the handbook say? And did the kid do the thing? What does the handbook say? Did the child do the thing? When we focus on the behavior and we punish the behavior, then I think that we're more consistent. But if I focus on the child, then my empathy and my sympathy kicks in and I start thinking about their difficult home life and that they've been going through a lot of stuff. And I'm not saying that we should never, ever make an exception, especially when there's very difficult things going on at home. I'm not saying that we're drones and that we're robots and that we are going to just fulfill the handbook every single time to the T, regardless of circumstances. But I am saying that if we focus on the behavior and not the child, we can be more consistent in what we do. And then the 4th thing about getting it right is inform your board chair. So when I was head of school, we had a rule at my school that I had to inform the board chair about suspensions and I had to consult with the board chair about expulsions. So I didn't have to get approval for suspensions, but I did have to meet with the board chair to discuss and basically get approval for expelling a student. And that was also the case when I was a division head regarding our meeting with our head of school with about suspensions and expulsions. Here's the thing. The person above you on the org chart is probably going to get a call or an email from that parent anyways. They're going to go over your head and they're going to appeal it because parents are doing that now more than they ever did. And so it's good for them to be informed by you with the details and the how did I gather this information? How do I know this is true? You don't want them finding out for the first time from the upset parent that's calling them, because then when you get the call from the board chair, the first word out of your mouth and all the words after that sound defensive. So be proactive, inform your board chair. Those 4 things, if you do them and try to do them consistently, you're going to get it right way more than you get it wrong. And then that brings us to our final section of this episode, and that is I want to give you 6 quick strategies to lower the emotional price tag. Okay, number 1, try to separate the emotion from the process. Again, easier said than done, but when you know that a decision might lead to a disciplinary decision, or your discipline policy might lead to a suspension or an expulsion, don't make that decision in the heat of the moment. I would be all wound up, all fired up about, I can't believe this kid did this thing to this other child, et cetera, et cetera. We rarely make decisions. We rarely make good decisions when we're emotional. So we need to take a breath. We need to have a structured process. We need to investigate. We need to document. We need to be transparent. We need to be consistent. Not saying any of those things are easy to do, but I'm saying that they're very, very necessary to do. Strategy number 2 for lowering the emotional price tag is to regulate your autonomic nervous system. And I'm not going to say much about that. We will become emotionally dysregulated. In the show notes, I have a link to a Google Doc that has a bunch of resources about breathing techniques and about decatastrophizing worksheets and just different strategies that you can use to regulate your autonomic nervous system. And you can do those very quickly in real time, in between making the decision and calling the parent, those kinds of things. So that's number 2. Number 3 is don't isolate. So we make these decisions in private, but it's really important, I think, I believe strongly, that it's important to have a trusted colleague. Maybe this is someone that's a friend that isn't in education, that's in the business world. But if it's a head from another school, I recommend that it's someone that's not in your geographic area, that's not like a competing school, quote unquote. You don't have to share the details, but you could talk to that person about the emotional weight of the situation. And that's true for even people that are geographically nearby. And, you have these affinity groups, you have these people that you meet at conferences, et cetera. And, you can share with someone who gets it and who gets you, because that isolation just magnifies the emotional pain. And if you don't have that network, I'll just briefly mention that, the PSL Pro membership community is available for you. And we go live once a week. We have people, we post in the community. People support each other. They're all school leaders. They all get it. They all get you. theprivateschoolleader.com/membership, if that's something that you want to look into. Number 4 on our list of strategies to lower the emotional price tag, number 4 is debrief after the decision. So I'm just so relieved after the conversation is over and we've transferred the records and we've cleaned out the locker and we've done this and done that, and I've informed the teachers that this student is no longer a part of our school, et cetera, that I'm just so relieved that I just even don't want to even talk about it. I don't want to think about it. But if you have a leadership team, if your school is small and you are the leadership team, you have to find someone to debrief with confidentially. What did we learn? What did we do well? Should we have done differently? What can we learn moving forward? How can we support each other emotionally right now? Because when you debrief, you can turn all of that emotional weight and pain. I mean, it might as well be turned into some growth for doing it better the next time. So that's something that I didn't do very well at any point in my career, was the debrief after the dust settled. And then I also think number 5 is that you need to allow yourself to grieve. And it might sound melodramatic that you would go through the 5 stages of grief when you suspend or expel a student, but I don't think it's melodramatic. You know, grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. You know, it's for everyone handles grief differently. A lot of it has to do with your upbringing and just a million different reasons why we handle grief differently. But allow yourself to grieve the loss of this child. And that's especially true with you know, an expulsion. With suspension, it's super stressful, but there's that hope that they can, maybe this suspension is what will get their attention and get the parents on board, and then they'll turn it around. But especially with that expulsion. And then number 6 is talk to somebody. And, you know, all of those feelings have to go somewhere. And I wonder, if your car's making a noise and you don't know how to work on cars, do you take your car to a mechanic? Yes. And if your AC unit is making weird noises or it's just not working, and you don't know how to work on AC units, are you going to call a person to come fix it? Yes. Because they're the professionals. And sometimes our feelings, especially in this job, get so big and get to be so much that we need to talk to a mental health professional. And so I think it's important. I'm not saying it's only a thing that you do after you have to suspend or expel a student, but it all has to go somewhere. And in our lives, when we have things that we don't know how to fix, we call a professional. And so I'll just leave it at that. So what are our big takeaways from today's episode? There's an emotional price tag to suspending or expelling students. And I think that they are guilt, grief, fear, empathy, and compassion, fatigue, and isolation. And then I think the emotional price tag can change the way we lead, and that can be through avoiding difficult conversations, inconsistency with the handbook, overcompensating with grace, which is really avoidance, and emotional burnout. And then I think there's some ways that you can get it right that can lower the pain. And that's number 1, be sure that you're sure. Number 2, focus on 2 sides of the coin, privilege and responsibility. Number 3, focus on the behavior and not the child. And then number 4 is to inform your board chair. And then finally, the 6 strategies to lower the emotional price tag. Number 1, try to separate emotion from the process. Number 2, regulate your autonomic nervous system. 3, don't isolate. 4, debrief after the decision. 5, allow yourself to grieve. And 6, talk to somebody. And so your call to action for today's episode is to take 15 minutes sometime in the next week to reflect on the emotions that you had the last time you did this, or if you've never done this, reflect on the emotions you feel when you think about doing this. And then ask yourself this question: how do those emotions affect what I need to do next time? And so just as we wrap it up, a quick reminder that I want you to grab this free resource called The 6 Keys to Improving Your Relationship with Your Board. And you can go to theprivateschoolleader.com/board to grab that. Also, a reminder that there's still time for you to make Parent Academy part of your fall teacher PD day with those plug and play webinars. And you can go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parent academy to check that out. And I would love to hear from you. My email address is mark.o.minkus@gmail.com. And just send me a quick email. It can be 2 sentences. What's a strategy you've learned on the podcast? What's your biggest pain point so far this year? Maybe that pain point turns into an upcoming episode. The show notes for today's episode are at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 159. And I'm on Instagram at theprivateschoolleader. And if you got value from this episode, I would really appreciate it if wherever you listen, if you would write a review and rate the podcast, because that helps the algorithm push it out as suggested content to leaders all over the world. And then the thing that I would really, really, really appreciate is if you would just share the link to the podcast with another school leader that you know or an aspiring leader at your school. You have a good eye for those rising leaders. Let's get this information into their brain and into their heart to help them grow. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I appreciate you and all of your hard work that you're doing for those lucky teachers and lucky kids at your school. Thank you so much for taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.